Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus, and in today's video I want to address the question of whether or not we actually have to suffer leading up to our inevitable passing, and perhaps some concepts that will provide hope in this regard, referencing terminal lucidity, which is very interesting, also one of my favorite subjects. And also, it'll give an opportunity to highlight this old article from 2014 at the Scientific American called One Last Goodbye, The Strange Case of Terminal Lucidity. So let's take a look at this, look at my analysis and what I think terminal lucidity is. And if that means that maybe there's some hope in terms of what we will all have to experience and what all our loved ones will have to experience. And that, of course, is the main subject here on this channel, where we talk about metaphysical issues, life beyond the grave, the meaning of supernatural experiences, the nature of the other side. If you like these subjects, I encourage you to go down and hit that subscribe button. Help keep this channel going, helps tell YouTube that we're still relevant. I think YouTube's algorithm has been doing a number on this channel lately. Lots of analytics are on the downward trend. Not enough people are engaging in the videos, so if you subscribe, let's help bring some life back into this channel. Leaving a comment, sharing the video also helps. And if you want to help support this work, getting information like this out there, then maybe sign up as a patron at patreon.com/afterlife topics. You can also work with me personally this way. Okay, so to go on to the subject, which is terminal lucidity. Some people don't know what this is, and it is the phenomenon of somebody perhaps even dying of a brain disease such as dementia, Alzheimer's. Inexplicably, they gain full lucid awareness shortly before their passing. It could be minutes to hours before their passing. It could be a whole day before they pass. But suddenly, it's like they are healed of whatever condition was keeping them from being cognizant. Now, in a normal reductionist materialist point of view, this would not be possible, and it confounds the skeptics. And usually when things confound the skeptics, the skeptics choose to just ignore whatever the subject is, because what can you do about it if you don't have a quote-unquote rational explanation? Although some analyses from the materialist intelligentsia do slip through the cracks, and you end up with articles like this one called One Last Goodbye, The Strange Case of Terminal Lucidity. And there's a very funny opening paragraph for this. I'm going to read this out here in a moment. Perfectly illustrates, I think, the problems with Western civilization. But so terminal lucidity is, of course, documented also in near-death studies, and a lot of the great near-death experience authors have written extensively about this phenomenon, and it ties in. And in my opinion, it is one of these cases where the stuff we talk about here, where a supernatural concept basically aligns with reality, where it becomes something that is very much tangible, very much real, that directly impacts our lives. And there are some reasons why I think terminal lucidity happens, and maybe what we can expect once we're about to cross over. But let's just take a look at this article by Jesse Bering and at scientificamerican.com. So I'm just going to read this opening paragraph here. I'm as sworn to radical rationalism as the next neo-Darwinian materialist. That said, over the years, I've had to, quote, quarantine, for lack of a better word, a few anomalous personal experiences that have stubbornly defied my own logical understanding of them. He continues with several anecdotes talking about these anomalous experiences, and I won't get into all of them, but then he goes on to the passing of, I believe it's his grandmother, And his experience with experiencing terminal lucidity, when her consciousness basically booted back up shortly before her passing, which, in his opinion, defied normal explanations, but he will not resign to it being a, quote, supernatural experience. But I do want to mention, again, that opening paragraph. I'm sworn to radical rationalism as the next neo-Darwinian materialist. I just want to say how miserable that philosophy is. Like, how miserable you have to be a self-described radical rationalist neo-Darwinian materialist. Is he's very unironically laying all that on the table, representing his view of the world and the universe. And I just find it very curious because it's such an incompatible philosophy, even with day-to-day life, right? So how do you effectively get through, I think, any life, anything, from the angle of radical, quote, rationalism? Because it's an oxymoron, right? Rationalism cannot be radical because then it's no longer rational. But they don't recognize that oxymoron. They don't recognize that they're contradicting themselves. And this has always been the issue with especially self-described materialists and the ones who think of themselves as the intelligentsia, who are the barrier to, all the, quote, superstition cutting into the mainstream. These days, I don't think that they represent the status quo as much. It's just too much information, too many personal experiences. But this is a good example of somebody stuck in that very sad, very depressing way of looking at the world, being forced to re-examine it. And that could be why he is maybe actually being a little bit humorous in this opening paragraph, because that point of view of his was shaken enough for him to write this article for Scientific American, obviously trying to tiptoe around and pander to readers who maybe share the same materialist worldview by saying, hey, I'm one of you guys, I'm on your side, so listen to what I have to say, which is actually a very good thing. It's a very effective way to maybe get a message across and get some of this information to penetrate into people's minds, get them thinking. So in fact, I think it's a great article because it directly does that. Let's take a look at his terminal lucidity experience. Okay, I'm sorry, it wasn't his grandmother, it was his mother, his own mother. When my mother died in early 2000, we had a final farewell that some researchers might consider paranormal. At the time, it did strike me as remarkable, and after all these years, I still can't talk about it without getting emotional. The night before she passed away at the age of 54 after a long battle with ovarian cancer, I was sleeping in my mother's bedroom alongside her. The truth was that I'd already grieved her loss a few days earlier, from the moment she lapsed into what the hospice nurses had assured us was an irreversible coma. So at this point, waiting for her body to expire as a physical machine wasn't as difficult as the loss of who she was as a person, is when I had completely broken down. It had all happened so quickly, and I suppose, being young and in denial about how imminent her death really was, I hadn't actually gotten around to telling her how grateful I was to have had her as my mom and how much I loved her. But then around 3 a.m., I awoke to find her reaching her hand out to me, and she seemed very much aware. She was too weak to talk, but her eyes communicated all. We spent about 5 minutes holding hands, me sobbing, kissing her cheeks, telling her everything I'd meant to say before but hadn't. Soon she closed her eyes again, this time for good. She passed away the next day. I didn't quite see the experience as supernatural when it happened. I'm not sure I do today either, but I also didn't have a name for the experience then. In fact, one didn't even exist back then. It does now: terminal lucidity. Let's have a more detailed look at the phenomenon in question. The term was coined only 5 years ago, so this is 2014, so this would be 2009, and it was coined by German biologist Michael Nahm. His 2009 article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies was the first modern review article on the curious subject of cognitively impaired people becoming clear-headed as their death approaches. According to him, cases of terminal lucidity had been recorded for millennia from accounts by classical scholars such as Hippocrates, Cicero, and Plutarch to 19th century medical luminaries like Benjamin Rush, who wrote the first American treatise on mental illness. It's just that apparently no one had thought to label or conceptualize these elusive incidents in any formal way before. So I'm not going to read off the whole article. I'll link it in the description. It was just one article about this that's kind of interesting, I think, in this regard, and a nice case of somebody who's dyed-in-the-wool materialist skeptic, having his worldview shaken a little bit by a personal experience, which is always how it happens. These guys, they have to have their personal experiences to be able to get out of that mental recession that is materialism. But when it comes to terminal lucidity, it is no surprise to me as an afterlife researcher. It's what I do. Because I believe what's happening is, well, the other side, higher dimensional forces, whatever you want to call it, they don't have permission to manipulate our world and just heal everybody of every terminal disease. This would go against a prime directive. People pass away, they transition into a higher dimensional world, and from that vantage point, we're a lesser evolved species. Even the astral Earth, where it's pretty similar to this world in a lot of ways, when people have experiences or project and go over there. Even that world, which may look pretty similar, is still a whole caliber more advanced than this world, just by nature of the fact that it's on a higher dimension. So they don't have permission to manipulate our lives. They don't have permission to heal everybody of sicknesses. Like, we're down here and we have to figure these things out on our own. Lord knows by now we should have cures to all these sicknesses ourselves, but I think a lot of greed and a lot of societal issues prevent that from happening, but I digress. The point is that they are not allowed to meddle with our affairs unless there are certain special circumstances. Occasionally, quote-unquote, miracles happen when somebody is cured of an illness. This may involve their own personal life plan or soul contract, whatever it may be. And so they miraculously get better from something, or they can be determined that, providing this, quote, miracle to this lesser evolved, human species down here will have some greater positive effect. And so sometimes those things happen. But more commonly, when they are allowed to interfere and to change things here, is when it's for interpersonal reasons. If someone's already going to pass away, simply come down and provide, excuse me, a level of healing, clarity, and lucidity to somebody who is passing away, so that they are able to communicate with their loved ones one last time to provide the healing and growth for those people who need it. And that's what they care about, and that's what they may be willing to provide. The second thing involves, well, the other element of terminal lucidity, which we cannot forget about, is the concept that somebody who could be in a lot of pain is suddenly not in that pain anymore. And I think this is also to benefit the person who is passing away, because it doesn't help at all if someone is crossing over to the other side and they're in incredible pain and trauma on this side, because that's a psychological state that they don't want people taking that with them into the other side. They want it to be a wonderful event for the person. And I have many reasons to believe that terminal lucidity is evidence that we do not suffer necessarily on our deathbed, because we have one foot in this world and one foot on the other world. And many people who have been at the bedsides of those who are crossing over can testify, as well as a few people who have been at the verge of crossing over, and then they had one of those miracles happen and were brought back. They can also testify having one foot in this world, one foot in the other world, and as a result, they are not experiencing pain and suffering, because, well, there's actually probably literally forces that are keeping them from being affected by the bodily pain, because their consciousness is switching between both focuses. So I think that's really good evidence that we do not have to suffer as we are crossing over, and it also shows you that the other side can change things when it's for a legitimate purpose, such as again, helping people around the bedside of a patient. So how do they do it? Maybe they beam in a bunch of healing energy or something, and then they if someone has Alzheimer's, they just tinker with the brain a bit and heal all of that shortly before they cross over, so that they can communicate. It could also be, this was a theory I postulated before in my books, what I call an auxiliary system. So our mind is going through our brain here. Now, if we had an astral body that is operating independently on a higher dimensional spectrum, it too may have some form of a brain, some form of a consciousness processor, but we're linked between these bodies. So if this brain is shutting down, it may be that the auxiliary brain, the astral mind, begins taking over for this mind, for the body you're in right now, at least temporarily. It may also, something like this could also explain the hydrocephalus cases, when people are born with little more than a brain stem and you mysteriously have full cognitive function. Again, there could be something going on where there's an auxiliary system on a higher dimension taking over some of the mental processes for the brain and the mind and how it operates on this dimension. So that could also be maybe even a natural explanation for terminal lucidity, which is as their physical brain is shutting down or has reached a threshold of no return, an auxiliary mind processing unit takes over that's operating on a higher dimension and begins operating the same way that the physical brain was before, but it cannot sustain itself, or it's not allowed to sustain itself working from that spectrum into this spectrum, so it only lasts for a little while. So I think it's a really important subject because it helps us to understand what it's like when we will someday be in a situation like this. And, for those of us who will be, I think, whether we pass away suddenly or slowly. If it's suddenly, then maybe not. But if we are on a, quote, deathbed, then I think that there is a case to be made that you will be more gradually transitioning to that side, and shortly before your transition, maybe the day of, you may actually feel completely healed and then prepared and ready to move into that side, as well as communicate with those by your bedside before it happens. Of course, again, it's possible to have an immediate death, kind of what happened with my father. Not to my mother, who was a bit more slow, but in that case, maybe this isn't such an issue, but it is something I often think about, because I don't particularly want to die a slow death on a deathbed. I would prefer something quick and not be also causing so much pain and grief for everybody around me. So again, to give some hope that when you're in a situation like that, that grief may be lessened for the people around you. You may not be in so much pain, and it becomes a smoother transition. And just speaking on a general term, especially studying near-death experiences, it seems like in many situations people are taken out of their body before there is a large amount of pain or anything that would cause that much suffering. So whether it's car accidents or any number of events or a terminal illness, it seems like as you have one foot into this world and one foot on the other side, more and more of your mind begins switching to that side, or being taken by guides, by helpers to that side, so that you become less and less aware of what's happening here and not cognizant of pain or suffering. And so oftentimes if you're at someone's deathbed, they may seem on the flip side of terminal lucidity, if they seem completely incoherent, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually incoherent. They may be just switching over to that side and using less of their consciousness, less of their mind here. But it still means that they may be perfectly lucid. The final point here is this also shows that when you have a loved one who is passing away, it is important to talk to them and have some faith that they can still hear you, even if it's not through their physical ears, or alternatively, maybe they can hear you because some of their consciousness or whatever is returning into their mind, and they're being healed enough to allow themselves to have a dialogue or exchange with you before they cross over. And so that's something to think about. So anyway, so I hope this was of some benefit. I think that it's important information for people to learn about. Terminal lucidity is a very important subject to address and to study, and I definitely recommend looking more into it. There's a lot of cases and a lot of books about this as well, and on the near-death websites, I think there's a lot of cases of this. And this is a good story here from this gentleman, but I've read many cases of people with like just late-stage Alzheimer's, the end of the line. There's absolutely no reason for them to be gaining full lucid consciousness during the last day of life, but they do. It will confound these skeptics. And as maybe a final point, I do have to wonder what a so-called radical rationalist is going to do when they cross over and they find themselves on that side. How will they be able to justify that? Sometimes I think what they do is they just go into extreme denial about the subject, and they go on and live on that side, denying that they've actually died, and then going about a life that is alarmingly similar to the life they had before, and kind of in this state of confusion. As an astral traveler, I've met many people, I think, in that kind of lifestyle of denial. So let's all avoid being like Jesse Bering, but let's applaud Jesse Bering for coming out with an article like this one, maybe opening many people's minds to this subject, back from 2014. All right, that's it for this video. If you want to learn more about these subjects and pick up a book like Understanding Life After Death or The Afterlife and Beyond over at afterlifetopics.com, or just join the Facebook group, Afterlife Topics Metaphysics, the Reddit group. A lot of places to get involved in this community to discuss these important issues. That's it for this video, and I'll see you guys on the next video.